Today on Rise Up, join the discussion with Dr. Irfan Alamgir and Ailia Halal as we delve deep into one of the most powerful revelations made by the riser Abdullah Hashem Abba Al-Sadiq on the School of Divine Mysteries. This is Rise Up.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Rise Up. My name is Ailia Halal.
Very good morning. My name is Irfan Alamgir.
And it's a very blessed morning today because we are waking up after a very beautiful night, and that was the night of Laylatul Qadr, the night of power, that is mentioned in the Holy Quran and is mentioned as one of the great nights of the month of Ramadan. And that night is a night which is worth 1,000 nights. This is a very significant moment in the year, and we were hoping to jump into some of the significance of this particular point in the year and also go into the episode that was released last night by the grace and mercy of the riser Abdullah Hashem Al-Sadiq, where he reveals some of the knowledge that has to do with Laylatul Qadr. So that was quite an event yesterday when it came out.
Yeah, a huge event, and I think straight off the bat, Laylatul Qadr is something that is showing now God's mercy, His coherence, and His complete openness with the people. Why do I say this? First of all, if you're a Muslim, it is very, very probable that you have 3 different Ramadans running concurrently. And in those 3 different Ramadans, we have 50 different opinions about which night is Laylatul Qadr. And it is really very interesting because when I was at university, and we had friends who were Shia, we had friends who were Sunnis, we had friends who were various different sects of Islam. And I remember in this one setting, we're sitting around the table, we're having a coffee, and all 3 of us are following a different program. By about 3 days, 2 days, one day, and everybody has their own opinions on which is the odd night. We know that it's in the last 10 nights. It's one of the odd nights, but you know what? God doesn't reveal this because He doesn't want people to, He wants people to work for it. And no one really knows when Laylatul Qadr is. And of course, we have so many narrations from Muhammad and the family of Muhammad that indicate that it is the night of the 23rd. There are narrations that talk about other nights, but overwhelmingly, the night of the 23rd is stated by the Imams of the Ahl Bayt that this is the night to look for it. And then, of course, you have that confusion that happened because of the rejection of the family of Muhammad, which led to the adoption of the lunar calendar, which was a big catastrophe. It was a huge blemish in Islamic history because it led to these differences and it actually enhanced sectarianism. But the riser of the family of Muhammad comes forward and in a beautiful, logical way, he explains that actually the solar calendar was the one that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came down with. And then he gives us proofs which are detailed in the book, The Goal of the Wise. And I don't want to open this topic up now because we have a lot to get into in this episode. But he made it very, very clear how the Muslims lost all of their jewels, if you will, because of their murdering of the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt who were given to them as treasures to really cherish. But instead of that, the Muslims were busy poisoning, murdering, beheading, carrying on a pike the heads of the Imams who were sent to guide them. And for this insolence, they had to endure the loss of the Kaaba and the loss of the month of mercy, Ramadan. Until now, when the riser of the family of Muhammad comes forward and reveals this secret knowledge, and of course he is the one who is prophesied to bring the 25 letters of knowledge to add to the 2 to complete 27. And this is a beautiful thing, and he has made it very, very clear to anyone who cares to listen that the 22nd of December, the night of the 22nd of December, is in fact Laylatul Qadr. Always has been, always will be, and it is open to anyone who would care to listen.
And I think a lot of people wonder what that means, the night of, because according to the lunar calendar, the night starts first. And
the
what
Muslims
we mean by
know about the night of, every Muslim knows this.
Oh, yes.
And because it's like, it's better than 1,000 months, right? So if I worship in this night, Ali, I'm going to get 80-something years, 0.5 years of worship under my belt.
Right.
So every Muslim knows about Laylatul Qadr. But for those people who aren't from an Islamic background, it's really, really important that I think you unpack what the night of power is.
I think that it's so critical. It's a night that's mentioned, like we said earlier, in the Holy Quran And the reason for it is that it's been equaled to 1,000 nights. And it's a very significant event in the year, because it's that event that it's stated that the destiny of the rest of the year is actually written down. And it's a point where you can actually pray and ask for forgiveness. It's almost like that New Year's resolution moment, but without starting it on the New Year, you started on Laylatul Qadr, you started on the night of power. And it's like a cleansing, it's like a fresh start, it's a new page. It's a very beautiful moment, and it's something that everyone should take the most advantage of. But it's also very fascinating to know that when the time comes, which is, of course, the time we're living in right now, it was prophesied that he would bring a lot of esoteric knowledge regarding this night. Because there are so many concepts in the Holy Quran that are very mystical, very esoteric, and they're not very explained. They're just hinted towards. And then you wonder the rest for yourselves. I mean, imagine right now the nation of Islam is still questioning when it is the Laylatul Qadr. Yes. And now we have the
Forget about Laylatul Qadr, when is Ramadan?
Yeah, they don't even know exactly when Ramadan is. They're not very sure on how to agree if the moon has been sighted or not.
Sorry, there was a gas cloud because of pollution, so we missed the moon this month.
It does happen,
It's
right?
comical, it is.
I mean, it happens, and that's why the calendar being a lunar calendar is an unfortunate belief system, and it's not even from Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. So absolutely, we know now that the night of the 23rd, which is basically the night before the 23rd starts, just to be very clear, is the night of power. It's the night of Laylatul Qadr, and the night that you should be praying, you should be repenting, you should be hoping that God would give us that fresh start. And that was what happened last night. We were busy praying and watching that very long-awaited episode of the School of Divine Mysteries.
Yeah, you might have noticed there was a bit of a gap between the last few episodes, and I think people get very restless, not just here in the community, but also people who are following the series, and boy, was it worth the wait.
It really was, and there was quite a bit revealed in there, my goodness. I mean, the answers to so many questions that have been asked for a very long time, especially regarding the Quran and linking it to the Ahlul Bayt or the family of Muhammad. This was something that was revealed last night in that episode, and we cannot wait to jump into it. And that's what we're going to do today. That's all we're going to focus on. It's the episode from last night.
Yeah, and I think it's completely worth the hour and 40 minutes that we have to go into this, and I can't wait to start.
Should we go on and get a head start on it?
Do it?
Let's do it. Let's go to the first clip.
So today we're going to talk about a really important topic. And the topic is actually, it's an answer to a lot of people that consistently ask this question. The group of people that basically are Quranists, or they are people that reject largely the narrations of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and say that a lot of corruption has taken place, and that the only thing that we are obliged to follow is the Quran. You know, so they basically take the same stance as Umar ibn al-Khattab did on the night of or a few nights before the passing of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when they were all gathered at his deathbed, and he asked the Muslims to gather for him a piece of paper and a pen in order that he may write down something, right? A narration of his words, that if they would follow it, the nation would never go astray. He was interrupted rudely by one of the companions, and that one was Umar ibn al-Khattab. He was identified as Umar in other narrations. And he said the Prophet is delusional, he's hallucinating, he's unwell. The book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is enough for us. We have the Quran, we don't need anything else. So the people that take this stance and they reject the narrations and they only want to follow the Quran, these guys are the copy-paste images. These are the mini Umar ibn al-Khattabs that follow that particular path. And not just Umar, but some of the other companions, such as Abu Bakr, that after the passing of the Prophet, for some reason, they decided that it would be too much of a fitna if the people continued to hold on to the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. They seemed to be afraid of what the Prophet might have told some people in secret. And so they gathered up all of the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they commanded that it be burnt. and the only thing that remained be the Quran itself, right? Or the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the tongue of His messenger, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But something really interesting takes place, you know. And like I said, this episode, it's all geared towards responding to these people that continuously ask the question, if there is such a thing as an Imam al-Mahdi, right? Or there is such thing as Mahdis, or if there is such thing as the wilaya or the successorship of the Imams after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is an extremely important thing. Why hasn't this thing been mentioned in the Quran if it is so important and somebody's heaven or hell or afterlife would depend on it? And for the person who enters into Islam or was born into Islam and doesn't know any better, this is a very valid question. And it's a question that could cause a person to go into a state of doubt or not be in a place of certitude, and that's why I think it's extremely important that we address this particular topic.
Yeah.
First off, we want to say that in terms of the Quran itself, there is this myth that has been propagated, and we've mentioned it briefly in other episodes on this channel, but I want to go over it in more detail in this one. There is this myth that has been propagated that the Quran is complete. And the Quran, because of the verse in the Quran that says that we're the one that brought down the remembrance and we are the ones that safeguard it, they interpret this verse from the Quran to mean basically that they're the ones who brought down the Quran and it is God's duty to preserve it, and therefore the Quran can never be corrupted. The Quran as we have today between our hands is the exact same version and the exact same order as it came down on the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, meaning that all of the verses are in their correct places. It's not mixed up with each other. There are no verses that are missing from the Quran, and there's no verses that are added onto the Quran. And this is pretty much what most of the Muslims today believe. By the way, not just Sunnis, but most of the Shia, Marjas, and scholars and sheikhs, they also believe the same thing, or at least they propagate this same idea that the Quran of the Muslims, Sunni and Shia, for the most part, is the Quran that we have, which is the one that was compiled by the third of the so-called caliphs or the so-called Al-Khulafa al-Rashidin after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when that was Uthman, and that's why they call it the Uthmani Quran. This narrative that they have completely goes against the ahadith, the narrations, and the view that the khulafa themselves held, and the companions that were living in the time of the Prophet and the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's household themselves. All of them, the guided Imams and the family members of the Prophet, and those who usurped, right, and are considered to be the rightly guided caliphs of Sunni Islam, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and all of the remaining companions at that time and the generations that succeeded after that, they totally and utterly believed the Quran to be an incomplete book, that a lot of corruption had infiltrated into it, right? And that its form right now was not the same form that it was in the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the reason why we know this is because of the evidence that was left behind. The second holiest book to the Sunnis, which is Sahih al-Bukhari, they consider it to be a compilation of the most authentic narrations, all right, of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it
So right from the get-go, you can see in that episode that a very sensitive topic has been touched. And that is the authenticity of the Holy Quran. How legitimately has it been preserved as a physical copy? And this is something that can be a very controversial subject, but I think it's a very necessary one because there's a lot of elephants in the room that have to be discussed regarding it. Now, while it might seem like a stipulation of being a believer, that you believe that that holy book is completely preserved as it came down and all the versions of it around the world are completely one and the same, while that might seem like a tempting belief for many Muslims out there, there are a lot of questions left unanswered, and it's important that we address them and we talk about them.
Yeah, talk about the elephant in the room. I think the way that Al-Sadiq breaks this down, the way he forensically dissects through the narrations on both sides of the fence, Sunni and Shia, I think make it completely irrefutable that there were certainly things that were taken out of the Quran for very specific political reasons. And I think Al-Sadiq in this talk also gives highlights or bullet points of where these things came about using both Sunni and Shia references. And when you read The Goal of the Wise, which has a whole section on it with proof and evidence, it has become very, very manifest that there was certainly some alterations that took place. And for those who cling to the idea that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's scripture could not have been altered, when clearly there is so much historical proof of the fact that it was, then this is tantamount to the flat earthers, where you send a rocket into space, you show them the earth is a sphere.
Clearly.
Just like the moon is a sphere and the sun is a sphere. And yet they're like, no.
They're adamant.
The earth is flat like this book here. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. And it really is extremely frustrating when you watch them present their theories because it really is completely bereft of logic.
I'm glad you brought that up. Do you know how many times you've had that question actually asked of us? Do you believe that the earth is flat? We don't. Just let's put it out there. We don't believe the earth is flat.
I mean, one of the most hilarious kind of comebacks I had, you have from these people is that, have you been in a space shuttle? Were you on the space station to be able to see that the earth is a... I mean, if every single planetary body is a sphere, then the earth also must be a round object. I mean... Logically. And let's not get... if you're a flat earther and you disagree, call in.
Yeah, hey, let's talk about it. It's not today's topic, but
it's not today's topic at all. We digress. But the point is that there is so much evidence that the Quran has been altered. And Al-Sadiq in the next clip will detail that, so I don't want to repeat things. The fact of the matter is that this is a difficult thing for a lot of Muslims who have, for some reason, ingrained in their brains that the Quran is the unalterable word protected by God himself. Well, the same God that sent Muhammad sent Jesus. The same God that sent Muhammad sent Moses. And Muhammad said, you're going to repeat all the mistakes of the Bani Israel. And one of the mistakes of the Bani Israel was to alter the scripture.
Exactly.
And to bring in ideas that were not taught by the person who brought the religion. For example, the Trinity and the current understanding as it exists today.
Exactly.
And of course, the deletion of the mention of Prophet Muhammad as a coming successor. I mean, if you're a Christian, you have heard the words of Jesus in the Gospels where he said, Moses wrote about me. Well, where in the Old Testament is Yeshua mentioned?
Yes.
There is no mention of him because it was taken out because the Israelites thought that Jesus was an antichrist and he was a demon. And this is something that's very well known. And likewise, the Muslims did the same thing. But a very interesting question that Al-Sadiq, he opens up the talk by saying, this is for the Quranists. This is for those people who follow in the footsteps of Umar bin al-Khattab, who uttered famously or infamously the words, the Quran is enough for us. And of course, it is not. Far from it. The Quran needs a light to be able to interpret it, and that light is Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. Without them, there is really no Quran. And that is why for every sentence or every surah, there's 25 different interpretations given by 25 different scholars, and all of them are usually incorrect. They do but conjecture, says the Quran.
And it's interesting also because we do recognize that this very topic, just the idea of discussing whether or not the Quran has in it corruption or has something missing in it or has something added to it, this topic in and of itself is a very controversial one. We recognize that, we sympathize with the people who find that difficult to digest, even difficult to listen to. It is actually a very common thing that is seen in Muslim households and in Muslims in general, that they are very aggravated by the idea of it even being suggested. And our job on Rise Up is also to help navigate the process of actually being able to have that dialogue and that conversation. Yeah. And as I said, we understand it's difficult and we do appreciate it. Yes. However, we also want to bring to the attention of those out there who identify as Muslim the fact that there are, in fact, very authentic ahadith and narrations that make it very clear that there's something up with the Holy Quran. Ahadith from Umar ibn al-Khattab, from Aisha, the wife of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and his family. There are narrations in Bukhari and in Muslim that are very clearly stating that the Quran is not as it was meant to be initially. And if that's the case, then surely we should have answers to those questions. We are a people who say that wherever the truth might be, we will go to it. We say we are companions of the evidence.
Yes, exactly.
What that means is that even if it's uncomfortable or unfamiliar terrain, we do not want to be a people that don't venture towards it, because if the truth is out there, then the truth is out there. And we are not greater than the truth. We are a people that want the truth. And to be worthy of the truth, you have to be brave enough to face the unknown and to ask questions that might be uncomfortable. I think one of the greatest tragedies when it comes to being a truth seeker, for the truth seekers, one of the greatest tragedies has been that in mainstream religion, it's been kind of indoctrinated into people the idea that it's wrong to ask certain questions, or it's wrong to bring up certain topics, or to question certain belief systems. And it's actually very much a good idea. It's good. Because the truth should be able to hold water. It should be able to stand the test. If it's not able to stand the test, then it cannot be the truth. And then you have to cast it aside immediately.
Exactly.
Now, are we believers in the Holy Quran? Of course we are. We believe in the Holy Quran, absolutely. But how do we reconcile the fact that the Holy Quran is meant to be a preserved document with the idea that other authentic narrations state that it's actually not been preserved? And the riser of the family of Muhammad, Abdullah Hashem Al-Sadiq, is that prophesied figure who's meant to resolve these issues. And subhanAllah, he did. And that's why we are his companions, and that's why we're so certain of what we believe in. But the rest of the episode really goes deep into what those controversies are and how we should be able to counter them.
Yeah.
So, shall we go ahead to the...
Yeah, let's go to
the next clip.
Preserves also in it the sayings and the words of the companions of the Prophet that lived with him, that first generation, is filled with narrations and sayings where the caliphs and the companions and the wives of the Prophet Muhammad are proclaiming the Quran to not be complete. You have also in the Shia sources narrations on the tongues of each and every one of the Imams from the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam that succeed the Prophet Muhammad, all the way up to the 12th Imam, Imam Mahdi alayhi salam, all the Imams between those two, proclaiming that the Quran that we have is not in its current form, and that there's another Quran that was preserved, and that the meaning of the verse itself, or the meaning that God would safeguard the Quran, is explained in another verse where it says, وَكُلَّ شَيْءٍ أَحْصَيْنَاهُ فِي إِمَامٍ مُبِينٍ, and everything we have safeguarded in a clear Imam. So the Quran is safeguarded according to the household of the Prophet Muhammad, but it's not safeguarded in paper, right, on a written form, in a written form as a book. It is safeguarded in the heart, in the mind, in the soul of an infallible Imam that God would place on the earth in every day and age. And each Imam would inherit the real Quran from the Imam that was before. And so the Quran would never be lost, because there would always be an Imam who would preserve it generation after generation. And that is how God preserves the Quran, by His Spirit being amongst creation and being able to preserve that Quran, versus this idea or this notion that all human beings would have a preserved copy of the Quran through its written format that was compiled by the third of the caliphs, Uthman, after they burnt all other copies of the Quran and all other narrations that said otherwise. Yeah. The narrations of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam also stated that there were many incidents that took place where people testified to, or the Imams narrated, that Imam Ali alayhi salam, after the passing of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he remained in his house for 6 months, not going anywhere, in order to accomplish his first task that was given to him by the Prophet. And the first task that was given to him by the Prophet was that he was to compile the Quran in its original form. So he was to write it down. And so he compiled for 6 months a book. He wrote down the verses of the Quran in the order that it came down, from the very first verse, right, all the way to the final verse, in order of revelation. In addition to that, he added into the book the interpretations that were given to him by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the zahir and the batin, the apparent meanings and the esoteric meanings of each verse, and the reasons why it came down, the circumstances and the names of the people in which the verses came down concerning. He wrote all of these interpretations and the tafsir down. So essentially we have this book. It's a grand book, and it has in it the Quran in its entirety, and it has in that Quran a lot of verses and suras that were not preserved in the Quran that we have today. And also in that book we have the entire interpretation and explanation of the Quran, so that the Muslim nation would never go astray. And according to the narrations, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he takes this book and he attempts to give it to Abu Bakr and Umar, and they reject and they say, we have our own Quran, we don't need your Quran, get out of here. And Imam Ali alayhi salam said, then you will never see this book again. It will remain with my family until the emergence of the Mahdi, and then it will be him who will take out that book and bring it forward to the people. And there are many narrations that state that the Qa'im comes with a new matter and a new jurisprudence, and he comes with a new book, and he restores Islam once again. He destroys what was before him, like the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam destroyed what was before Islam. So if the Prophet destroyed the idol worship before Islam, the Qa'im will destroy that which came before he does, and what comes before he does is a distorted version, idol worshipping version of Islam, in which the Muslims are followers more of these non-working scholars and of Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman, and the usurpers and the tyrants that took away the rights of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. The narrations continue, and they state that he comes with a new book, and they say that he comes and basically his companions will be setting up tents in the middle of Kufa. The non-Arab companions of the Qa'im will be teaching the Arabs the Quran as it came down. And so here in this narration, we have an indication, an implication, a very clear one, that is stating that the Quran that the people have now is not the true one, and that the true one will come down, or it's not in its true form, there's something wrong with it, and that as it came down, the Quran as it came down will be revealed by the companions who will accept the Qa'im, who most of them are non-Arabs, and most of them, it's easy for them to accept a different version of the Quran, as to where the people whom are Arabs that grew up on Islam will find it very difficult. And that's why the narrations state that the matter of the Qa'im is something which is very hard, especially upon the Arabs and especially upon the Persians, and that there are very few of the Arabs that are with them, and narrations that state that his first enemies are the Arabs. So he doesn't have any clearer enemies than the Arabs and the Persians. Is because they're the ones that have a vested interest in the preservation of the current version of the Quran, because of the fact that they were propagating it, and they were the ones that speak its language, or at least the Arabs speak its language. And another narration mentioned that nothing will be more harder upon the person that has memorized the Quran than the memorization of the Quran in the time of the Qa'im.
So clearly, when you watch that particular part of the episode, one thing that you must realize, especially if you're someone who says you're a Muslim, whether you're Sunni or Shia, is that the history regarding the Holy Quran is a very bloody history. It's a very dark history. There's something that happened that should not have happened. Quite a few things, actually, from raising the Quran on spears in battlefields where pages were torn and placed onto spearheads, and it was not respected, it was not sanctified as it should have been, to the burning, the great Quran burning, that is, for some reason, very revered today and considered a very good act that was done by Uthman during his reign as caliph. So these parts of history are very controversial. They're very difficult to read about because there is something very clearly that went wrong there, and it's necessary that we discuss it because it kind of indicates towards why it is that there are all these different versions that exist, different recitations, different ways of being written of the Holy Quran. This has to be something that's recognized.
Yeah, and especially under the reign of the third Sunni Caliph, Uthman bin Affan, there was a concerted effort to round up any alternative versions of the Quran and have them burned. And there was a very systematic effort that took place in order to ensure that that happened. Why? Because Uthman bin Affan said, in order for this empire to remain united, it has to be united on one version of the book. It was almost like a Islamic Council of Nicaea. And
it really was.
Right? And there is overwhelming evidence of, this is something that is a historical fact. This is not something that is in a narration or a hadith. This was happening on the ground, and the historians have recorded it as such.
And by the way, it's detailed in, to a T properly in Sahih al-Bukhari. You can read the whole story. There's quite a long, detailed explanation, but it's there in Sahih al-Bukhari, and all scholars agree that this took place, and the Sunni scholars of Islam are very happy that it happened. Right,
so the narrations are in alignment with history, just like we study history and historical events that happen. When there is this alignment between history and narration, it becomes very, very robust evidence that there was an effort and a very clear reason given by the tongue of Uthman bin Affan himself. He said, we have to round up these alternative versions and they must be eliminated. Otherwise, we're going to cause fracturing of this great imperial power that the religion of the Prophet became in the reign of the second and third caliphs. And as such, Al-Sadiq has used narrations over and over again to show people, just to raise the question of the possibility that there were definitely attempts to remove parts of the Quran that were deemed a threat to the state, to the empire, and also to include things that should have been included. We have Umar bin al-Khattab, who is revered by 1 billion Muslims all over the world. And he is himself stating that he wanted to bring a verse that was in the original Quran, but is not present in the one that they had during his reign as caliph.
Exactly.
He says, I would definitely do it. And I think Al-Sadiq talks about this. He said, I would definitely bring this back.
Yes.
But I don't want to give people the impression that I am the one bringing the Quran. This is only for the Prophet, which is such a insane statement when you consider the possibility that this is also the man who said, I will make my own version of the Salatul Fajr.
And also the same man who said the Quran is enough for us.
The same man who said
but now he's saying the Quran isn't even complete.
Yeah, there you go. And I think that
problematic.
It is a problem. I mean, let this information sink in, and I do understand that this is a big earthquake that's going on right now. When I was brought up with the idea that the books of the Christians and the Jews are completely corrupted. In fact, they are so corrupted that even parts of it that are mirror images of the stories mentioned in the Quran just don't even go there, because the corruptions are overt and they're also subtle. So in order for you not to get the wrong idea about the religion, don't even go to the Bible at all. Keep it away. It's written by the devil. The Quran, however, is perfect. Every single letter of the Quran is as it came down to the Prophet Muhammad, with every single, zabar and zair and all these different things. And of course, even that has been debunked. It has been.
It has been very clearly. I mean, if you go through the different versions that exist of how the Quran should be written, as well as how the Quran should be recited. So these are two separate things.
Yes.
This is a very alarming situation because there are various versions of different verses that very dramatically change the meaning of what those verses are saying. And unfortunately, and this is something that we really have to recognize here, if you go to a scholar and you say this to them, the first thing you'll hear is denial. They'll say, no, don't worry, there's no different Qurans, this is all rubbish. But then if you present evidence, which does exist, and you say, well, why is this like this and that like that, they will halt for a second and say, well, yes, there is some deviation, but it's not important, it's not relevant. But it is, because the whole argument is lying on the premise that the Quran is unchangeable, unalterable, and there's only one version. So clearly there's something wrong in the narrative. Something is not working. There's a huge contradiction there. If you're interested, by the way, in that evidence, if you're saying to yourself, well, then show us the evidence, get the Goal of the Wise. You can download it for free, or you can get a copy for yourselves on our online store, and open the book, and you'll see this amazing chapter called The Corruption of the Holy Quran, and it actually goes into the evidence of how it was corrupted. Now, in that clip, Al-Sadiq, from him his peace, was very clear about one thing. He says that the Quran is preserved. And he says that we're not saying it's not preserved. We're not saying that that's untrue. He says in the clip that we just watched there, that the Quran itself says that we have preserved it in a clear imam. So the Quran is safe. It is something that God has protected. But it's not the way people think. It's not in the form of a book that is varying from another book, that varies from another book, and they all are called the Holy Quran. That's not how you preserve the Holy Quran, and God is far greater than to do it in such a superficial way.
I mean, subhanAllah, even analyzing the verse that says that this is a protected book, it reveals a very important part of the whole story in this discussion. When in that verse that Sister Ailia just mentioned, it is saying that the Quran is preserved, but in an Imam al-Mubin, a clear Imam, a clear leader, a man appointed by God. This is the individual that has the Quran preserved within him. And lo and behold, at the time of the Khulafa Rashidun, we had Imam Ali alayhi salam coming to them saying, I have compiled the entire Quran with me. I have written down everything that was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was told to go away. And we have our version of the Quran is good enough for us. Thank you very much.
Which it wasn't, because then they had to burn all of them. So clearly it wasn't good enough. And just in case anyone's wondering what we're talking about, let's quickly rewind, I think, and talk about the history very briefly. We have got viewers out there who are not they're not very familiar with perhaps the history of Islam and the political history in particular. So I think it's important that we touch on that very quickly and kind of give some context.
Yeah, let's do it.
So we're talking here about which point in history? We're talking about the point in history where Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family has passed. He's no longer amongst the people, and now the people have a choice to make. Are they going to adhere to his commandment, to pledge their allegiance or to uphold their pledge, because they had already pledged their allegiance to Imam Ali as the next caliph, as the successor, the rightful God-appointed successor, or would they elect a leader for themselves? And surprise, surprise, they chose the second option. They chose to elect a leader for themselves under duress, under fear-mongering, and that was Abu Bakr, who was being pushed up, propped up by Umar ibn Khattab as the rightful successor for God knows what reason, he thought it was better that they choose him over Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib.
Yes.
And what happens after that?
Yeah, so this is where the train of the Islamic Ummah gets derailed. It goes off track because they reject the man appointed by God, who was Imam Ali alayhi salam, without any shadow of a doubt. And this is where the appointment of Abu Bakr takes place through a shura, through a gathering of influential, powerful people with, let's just say, alternative interests. And they take the reins of the caliphate that was the right of the Prince of the Believers, Imam Ali. And from that moment onwards, every single corruption began to enter into the religion of Islam, to the point where at the end of the reign of the third caliph, Islam had been massively distorted. And of course, why would it not be when huge chunks of suras, whole chapters of the Quran were deleted? Why wouldn't it be when you would reject the proof of God? You would reject the Imam al-Mubin. And the one who preserves the Quran. And this is something that if you are a Sunni Muslim listening to this, you're going to have to wrestle with. You really, really have to confront this reality. It did happen. People were murdered. Imam Hassan and Hussein were murdered. Imam Ali was killed. The Prophet's family were butchered. This is a reality. Why were they butchered? Because they were appointed by God. And when you kill the men appointed by God, you have the example of the children of Israel who, in a similar fashion, brutally killed a lot of the prophets and messengers that were sent to them, and then they went astray. The Muslims repeat the same pattern, and guess what? They get the same results. And the corruption of the Quran is a direct consequence of the rejection of the Imam al-Mubin, the Imam who is the clear preserver of the Quran itself.
And for anyone interested, that is Surah Yasin, verse number 12. You can go ahead and check it out for yourselves, read the Arabic. We recommend that you read the Arabic itself, and you'll find the words Imam al-Mubin there, and that's referring to the Imam of the time. Why is it so necessary that the Quran be preserved in a clear Imam? Well, very obviously, if you take a look at the time that we're talking about, when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family had passed, there was a lot of scattered ideas of religion at that point already. There were all these different manuscripts and pieces of writing and verses that were being recited in different ways by different tribes. So clearly, there has to be that source of truth that is authentic, that is original. The household of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the source. It was the place where revelation had been being received. It was where he lived. It was his family and his household. They were the ones who were aware of the religion. They were the true custodians. They were the successors. So the truth of religion should have come from them. The Quran itself had to have come from them. And it was known by the Muslim nation that Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib had been entrusted with that duty by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family. He was the one who was meant to preserve the Quran and give it to the people. And he did. And this is the tragedy that is amongst the great list of tragedies that the Muslim nation allowed upon themselves. And that is that when Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and his family, did pass away, Imam Ali went home, and for 40 days and 40 nights, he wrote the Holy Quran from the very beginning till the very end, exactly as it had been revealed. He made sure that all the scattered pieces had been put together, that the recitation was the correct recitation, that it was written the way it had been revealed. And then after he had written it, he came forward to, again, the irony, he came to the unholy successor, so-called successor of Prophet Muhammad, the wrongfully chosen caliph, Abu Bakr, who had not been appointed by God, who Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had never said is the rightful successor, and he presented it to him. Imagine that, even after everything that had taken place, he still took from his time and effort to come in front of these people in their council and say, listen, I've got the Holy Quran, I was meant to write it down, I have written it down, here it is. Perhaps, imagine in Imam Ali's shoes, imagine being there. Imagine in his mind, he must have been thinking, perhaps this will protect some of the Muslims from completely going astray. But somehow that was a great threat to the Caliph of the time, to Abu Bakr, he didn't like the idea too much. And as you continue the episode, it becomes abundantly clear why he didn't like it. But the fact of the matter is that at that point, Abu Bakr and Umar said, look, we don't need your Quran, please take it away. And remember, at this point, there was no compiled version of the Holy Quran that existed except for the ones that was in the hands of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib.
Yes.
Before that was compiled, there was literally no compilation whatsoever. It was scattered pieces of parchment that just existed between the hands of the people. So the fact that this compilation was rejected was a huge insolence to God. And Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib took it as such. And he said, by Allah, you will not see this. You will not see the true Quran until the day of the rise of the Qaim.
Subhanallah.
Imam Ali made it very clear, and he sealed the fate of the Muslim nation at that point. And since that day, we have not had the true Quran. And this is from the narrations.
Yeah, the Quran in its entirety. And before we dive into the next video, I think it's really important now to set the stage. So Al-Sadiq is saying the Quran is the #1 book and the source of information for Muslims. Anything that doesn't agree with the Quran is rejected as a false narration. They say the Quran is complete, perfect, exactly as it came down. And then, of course, he presents evidence to the contrary. And then he says that the reason to discuss this subject is because those people who are the Quranists, who only follow the Quran, are saying, well, if this subject of the Mahdi was so important that our hereafter depended on it, then why is it not mentioned in this kitab, in this book that came down? I mean, surely this is the most important critical matter. And if I, for example, reject the banner of the Qaim or reject the banner of the Yamani, I go to hell, and this is not mentioned in the Quran, then how can I be held to account?
Right.
Well, this is the point that is now going to be covered, and boy, is it powerful. I think we've set the stage. Imam Ali alayhi salam came with the completed Quran that he had painstakingly compiled over this period of time when he was intensely focused in gathering all of his documents, and of course he had memorized the Quran. As we know, he used to listen to the Quran being revealed to the Prophet Muhammad as he spoke it, and he memorized it, and then he wrote it all down, and then he brought it to the caliphs of misguidance, and he said, here, take this. They rejected him. He said, it's sealed, it's shut, it's done. This will now be revealed when the riser from the family of Muhammad appears. So this is where we are up to right now. Shall we go into the next video?
Yes, let's go to the next clip.
Comes down in a completely different form and way. And so those are a few of the many narrations that we have in Shia Islam which speak to this fact that there is a very big problem, and the problem is the corruption of the Quran. In terms of Sunni Islam, when you go over there and you look at Sahih al-Bukhari, it's absolutely filled, Muhammad, and you know that. It's filled with narration after narration after narration, in which the companions are stating that the Quran as it is not complete. You have, for example, Umar ibn Khattab himself, who was responsible for a lot of the burnings of the different versions of the Quran. It seems like he burned versions of the Quran that contained verses that he was attached to, you know. And after the burning took place, he realized it, and he was like, oh my goodness, well, what should I do now, you know? Because I do remember this verse, which was called the verse of the stoning. He really loved to stone people, and he couldn't find the verse anymore, and so he testified. He said, you know, if it wasn't for the fact that I don't want people to accuse me of making up verses in the Quran, I would have wrote down with my own hand, meaning I memorized anyway the verse of the stoning from the Quran, and unfortunately I can't find it. Nobody preserved it, so we're just going to have to do without it. Other companions said, in these Sunni narrations, they say nobody should say that they have memorized the entire Quran. Rather say that you've memorized what has survived from the Quran, because much of the Quran has been lost. Other narrations have companions in there in which they state that there were entire suras from the Quran that were deleted, that weren't preserved in this new version that they have. Other companions mentioned that there were particular surahs in the Quran that were the size of even Surah Al-Bara'ah, which was over 100 verses that were lost, or that there were other surahs that were 2 to 3 times the size that they currently are, but a more condensed version. That's all that survived with the preservation of the Quran. Narrations indicate on both sides, Sunni and Shia Islam, that 2/3 of the original Quran is lost, is gone, and that only we have one surviving third of the Quran that is mismatched and placed in a different order, and that words were confused in there. And you have narrations on the Sunni side in which you'll have companions saying, for example, they want me to read this verse in this way, but the way that I remember it is this way. I remember that they said, وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَخْشَى وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا تَجَلَّى وَالذَّكَرِ وَالْأُنْثَى. But they want me to recite it in a different way, and they'll argue with one another about particular verses and particular surahs in this way. And you have in Shia sources tons of hadiths that basically have the Imams saying, don't recite the verse in this way, this is the way that the verse came down. You have Aisha, the very wife of the Prophet Muhammad proclaiming that there were parts of the Quran, verses of the Quran that was written and it was hidden underneath the bed, and it was eaten by a chicken or eaten by a goat, and that it was lost in that way. There were conversations in which she talked about verses that pertained to breastfeeding the adult, and that these verses were changed or were taken out of the Quran or condensed, mismatched, misplaced, and so you have a consensus by the family of the Prophet. And also, I wrote about this in The Goal of the Wise, and people can look at it and read about it in more details. They have to do is go to our website and go to the library section, and you can download and read The Goal of the Wise for free, or you can order a physical copy of it. And when you go to the chapter of the corruption of the Quran, I've placed in there a lot of explanation and evidence to the fact that there even exists today different versions of the Quran that are being sold actually in the Muslim world, and that if you go online, you can order these different versions of the Quran, and you can do a side-by-side comparison of them for your own self to verify that even today there's different versions of the Quran. So we're not even talking about something in the past, but nonetheless there's this consensus between the family of the Prophet, between the Prophet's companions, between his wives, between the caliphs, and between the people that came hundreds of years later, right? Decades and decades later, like, for example, the author of Sahih al-Bukhari and the author of Sahih Muslim, and these narration books, these were written hundreds of years later after the Prophet Muhammad or over 100 years later, and they contain inside of it all of these narrations, which means that the person who preserved it and verified them to be authentic narrations believes in them and adopts these views, meaning that many generations after the Prophet Muhammad the Muslims were united in the fact that the Quran, which is currently with them, is not the true Quran, it's a different Quran.
Yes. Such a very important fact that you have proven very clearly, and it's and leaves no excuse to the people today to deny. The entire generation that was contemporary to the revelation of Quran, and the people who have supposedly related today, they all agree that it wasn't the version that Muhammad and the Ahlul Bayt had.
So we're going to jump into that narration right after our discussion here. But keep tuned in because it's very, very interesting what the Riser of Al-Sadiq reveals right after that short clip.
Yeah.
But I think what's so necessary to recognize here is that we cannot be hypocrites. There is this stance or perspective in the Muslim world that the book is enough for us, the Quran is enough. But then the Muslim world also says the Quran is not complete. There are chapters that are almost equal in length to Surah Al-Barat, which are missing, are not in the Holy Quran. There are narrations that are authentic, that are seen as valid by scholars, that are agreed upon to be true narrations, that are saying that, oh yes, there are many verses missing, and verses were eaten, and verses were lost and omitted. How can we now look at this book and say it's enough? The reason behind it is clearly that the people or the companions with the book are being relied upon historically, and the book itself is not enough. But that's what we are saying. We're saying that there has to be a person involved. The book is not enough. But we're saying the person that you are running after is the wrong one. It has to be the one that God appointed, not the one the people appointed.
Right. This is why God sent 124,000 prophets to the earth. Exactly. If it was just a case of a few books, then
should be enough. The library should be enough.
We shouldn't need these constant sending. But the reason why God has sent a plethora of prophets upon this planet is because they are the containers of the scripture and the book and its interpretation, most importantly. And I think Al-Sadiq, in that little clip, he also mentioned that, as you said earlier, there are vast swathes of the Quran missing. I mean, to have 1/3 of the Quran missing,
wow,
or the one that we have now is 1/3 of the actual Quran, is a terrifying reality.
It is.
And for those Quranists and those individuals who reject the successors and companions of the will, there is a big newsflash coming. So please stay tuned for that. And one of the areas that were very decisively and very menacingly taken out of the Quran are those that mention the successors of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they deleted many things. And Al-Sadiq talks about these narrations, and he's going to go into another one by a very famous, I believe he's Sunni, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, who also indicates extremely strongly that there are parts of the Quran that were there before that are not there in the book we have in front of us. And over again, using all of these personalities in the first few centuries after the death of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you have over and over again the same thing being brought up. Now, in medicine, we have something called evidence-based medicine. And when you get a result over and over again, you have to accept it as the truth. Whether you want to believe it or not, the evidence is overwhelming. And this is why this great book, The Goal of the Wise, and Al-Sadiq actually reads from it and he references it, is so important to read because it goes step by step so that there can be no confusion in this. And when you read it with an open heart and an open mind and a sincere intention to know the truth, you will reach the same conclusion that we did and anybody else who reads this book with an open heart, open mind, and a clear intention. And Al-Sadiq is demonstrating these points over and over again, and he's giving so many points because he has mercy on the people who have been brainwashed or who have been told over and over again the Quran is complete in every way, shape, and form, perfect without any alteration whatsoever. And he presents in this book, he actually challenges people. He said, go and buy this version of the Quran and this version of the Quran and see how the letters are different and see how even in this day and age, the Quran have different letters with sometimes different parts of the Arabic alphabet missing in one verse versus the other. And this is something, again, detailed in The Goal of the Wise. So for those Muslims who are still not convinced, I think I'm not really sure what else to say to get them to see the reality they are facing. You know, if I was to say, you're standing on a train track and a train is coming at 100 miles per hour and it's going to hit you in the next 30 seconds and you're like, no, it won't. And you're standing, you can hear the train, you can see the train, but you're denying the train exists. This is something that is just not a wise move.
Yes, it's not.
It's a very unwise one. The goal of the wise is the book you need to read. It is down. You can download it for free from the website, theahmadireligion.org, under the library section, I believe. And this is something that you need to inform yourself about. And it's a very, very important topic to be aware of, because the companions of the will were indeed mentioned in the Quran, and they were mentioned in detail. And this was something that the ruling elites did not want to be included in the Quran, and as such it was deleted from the Quran that exists today.
That's the tragic reality that we have to face. If the people out there are saying to themselves that we are Muslim and we have to believe in the Holy Quran and the book is enough and the Quran is preserved, then they have to now take stock of all these narrations that say that it is not the case. And let's just be brave enough to admit it. Let's look at the reality for what it is. Let's own up to what we're seeing in front of us and realize that if the book is not complete, what is the solution? You tell us. If you out there are listening and you're saying to yourselves, well, if the Quran is not complete, then what's next? Do you have the answer to that? Because we do. We believe that the man sent by God is the religion in and of itself. But for you, if the religion is a book, and books can be burnt, as the Quran has been.
Yes.
And books can be torn, as the Quran has been. And books can be put onto the heads of spears and sort of used as a weapon against your fellow man, which is exactly what happened in the history of Islam. And this happened with the Holy Quran. If these terrible things can happen to a book, then how will that book save us? How will that book speak to us? And how indeed are we meant to understand that book when all of us are reading it differently? And when there are so many ways of reading it, and there are so many different forms of recitation, it's a huge problem that has to be realized so that we can move on to finding the solution. This is what the riser of Al-Sadiq is indicating towards in this episode, along with the revelations that come in the very episode that we're watching right now. And he was just about to reveal a narration that's also mentioned and written in the Goal of the Wise, and actually he's reading it from the book itself. So should we go ahead and see what he was about to say? Let's see.
That we used to recite a surah which resembled in length and severity Surah Al-Bara'ah. And I have, however, forgotten it with the exception of this which I remember out of it. If there were two valleys full of riches for the son of Adam, he would long for a third valley, and nothing would fill the stomach of the son of Adam but dust. Isn't that incredible?
Indeed.
In Sahih Muslim, you have one of the companions reciting. How precious is this? How precious is this if we are looking upon a verse of the Quran that is not in the current Quran, that nobody's reciting anymore? And we're lucky enough to have that. Here we have that in Sahih Muslim. We have this verse that they're saying was left out. He also said, we used to recite a surah which is similar to one of the musabbahat, and I no longer remember it, but this much I have indeed preserved. And he gives us another verse that's not in the Quran that we currently have. O you who truly believe, why do you preach that which you do not practice? And it also said, that is inscribed on your necks as a witness, and you will be examined about it on the day of resurrection.
Subhanallah.
Other companions, they proclaimed in Al-Itqani fil Ulum, another famous book which was written by Al-Suyuti. It says in there that other companions claimed that 2/3 of Surah Al-Ahzab went missing. The narration states, what is the extent of Surah Al-Ahzab? And then the companion states 72 or 73 verses. Then he says, one of the other companions says, yeah, it used to be equal to Surah Al-Baqarah. And in it, we recited the verse of stoning.
Wow.
What is the verse of stoning? He replied, and then he recites the verse. He says, the fornicators among the married men, as-sheikh, and married women, as-sheikha, stone them as an exemplary punishment from Allah, and Allah is mighty and wise. So this seems to be the verse that Umar ibn al-Khattab was claiming was missing. They found it, he recited it, they preserved it in these outside sources from outside the Quran. So the Muslims themselves, they're stating that the Quran is corrupt. And actually they have these verses, kind of a lot of them, some of them, here and there in these different books. And Aisha, here's the narration. She says, no doubt the verse of stoning and the breastfeeding of adults by 10 sucklings was revealed, and it was on a paper below my bedding. When the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and his family died, and we were busy, a goat entered and ate it. So she's basically saying that there's a different part of the law. Okay?
Yes.
Just like Umar ibn Khattab said. Umar ibn Khattab said that there's a different part of the law. There's a part of the Sharia, the jurisprudence now. Islam is not even being practiced as it should. There is an obligation upon us. That obligation, or that part of the law, is that if there's an old man and an old woman who fornicate, we have to stone them. But we didn't stone them. Okay, we don't stone them anymore because that verse didn't survive. So we're not practicing Islam as it should. We're not upholding the covenant as we should. Aisha is saying the same thing, that there's this part of Islam where if there's a man and a woman that are not mahram on each other, right, that are not related to each other, if you want to make them related to each other, then, for example, if you and there's another woman that's not your sister, not your mom, not your relative, not your wife, not your daughter, if you want to be around her and be able to hug her, kiss her, just like a son would do his mother, or brother his sister, and never be able to marry one another, well, there's a solution for that. And the solution, according to her, was a verse that came down in the Quran where a woman, an adult woman, can breastfeed 10 times a man, and then by that man breastfeeding from her, he becomes mahram on her. Now, I'm not saying that that's correct. What I'm saying is that we have here examples of these companions and the generations afterwards stating that there are verses that are mentioned from the Quran. Do you get it?
Yes.
A lot of people, they would object and they would say, absolutely not. We're not going to take some narrations and we're going to use them to disprove the Quran that's between our hands, that we know, or that the Quran says that it's preserved. And this is the miracle of the Quran. And the problem in that is that you have narrations from Muhammad and the family of Muhammad alayhi salam, and from the messenger himself, that state that the Quran cannot be interpreted without a companion or without a guide or without an imam who will explain it. And that's the reason why there's so many sects that exist, and they're all fighting one another from after the death of the Prophet Muhammad up until the current day. Now, you'll remember in Islamic history, it's extremely ugly. After the death of the Prophet Muhammad, what happens is that Muslims break down into two groups. One group of Muslims are fighting against another group of Muslims. There's armies of 70,000 people battling against one another. And on one side you have companions like Talha and Zubair, and you have like Aisha, the wife of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, going out to lead an army, sitting and riding on a camel against the Prince of the Believers and the husband of the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, and his cousin and his successor, Imam Ali alayhi salam, and his companions on one side, and they're fighting a vicious fight against one another. And this is because the guide of the Quran is no longer there, and these Muslims now are indifferent with one another over the meaning of the verses and over the religion itself. And so the book has to have its author with it, or the companion of the book, the person who preserves it. And that's essentially what the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam are stating. There's also this other thing that the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam said, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa said. He really emphasized on this, and his Ahlul Bayt emphasized on this, that there is this golden rule that exists. And the golden rule is that if you hear a narration from Muhammad or attributed to Muhammad or the Ahlul Bayt, you are not allowed as a Muslim to deny it. No matter how absurd it seems, you cannot deny the information, especially if you are in doubt about its source or you don't know if it's true or false.
Right, so something that you definitely have to realize watching that is that according to the narrations that refer to the Quran, there are parts of jurisprudence missing, right? There are parts of jurisprudence of how to live the correct way in society that are not in the Quran. How can a book that is incomplete of how to live be enough of a guide on how you should live?
Yes. I mean, let's really look into these hadith that come from the Sahih books. Let's first of all talk about this personality that we left you on the cliffhanger, and then Al-Sadiq, of course, filled in the gap, which is pertaining to Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. And in Sahih Muslim, he says something interesting. He says, I remember that there was a surah of the same length as Al-Musabbihat, which are like smaller suras which are often used to recite in the daily prayers of the Muslims. One of them, for example, is Surah Al-A'la. And this is a very well-known surah that the Prophet Muhammad used to recite, for example, during Friday prayers. It was one of his favorite surahs. There are many narrations on it. It's a smallish surah, but it's enough, like I believe it's 19 verses. And this, he says, there was a surah like that, and now it's gone and completely missing. But I remember from it this line. And he talks about if the son of Adam had 2 valleys of gold, and so on. And the next bit is really, really striking and really terrifying as well, because he says there was a surah in the Quran which was the length of Surat al-Barat. Now this is also called Surat al-Tawbah. Actually, it's better known as Surat al-Tawbah. And this chapter of the Quran has 129 verses. 129. And he said, I can't remember any of it except
My goodness.
for this line. And then he recites that verse that he can remember from this surah, which was approximately the size of Surat al-Barat. And we also hear the fact that Surat al-Ahzab, which is 73 verses in the modern Quran, was the same length as Surat al-Baqarah. Surat al-Baqarah has 286 verses, verses 73. Contemplate on that.
My goodness, what a loss.
What a loss indeed it was for the Muslims. But is it a surprise when you reject and murder the Caliph of God that he sent you as a mercy? If you kill the Imam al-Mubin, guess what? Chaos, confusion, corruption will enter into the religion of Islam, just as the Holy Prophet said that it would, and it would need correction through the coming of a man called the riser of the family of Muhammad. Another title is the Mahdi, which is better known in Muslim circles and Islamic circles. And the Mahdi, specifically among them, the Ahlul Bayt said, the riser from the family of Muhammad, who is now revealing the truth of the matter using the same narrations that Sunnis say is second only to the Quran itself.
Yes.
And he has not just used one narration, he has used many. And he has not just used personalities that are deemed insignificant. He is using Umar bin al-Khattab, Aisha, the wife of the Prophet Muhammad, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, very prominent figures around the time, all saying the same thing. There cannot be smoke without a fire, people. If you are inhaling these fumes, you're going to be looking for the fire, and the fire is there. It's a very real fire, and if you do not acknowledge it, it will burn you. It will eat you alive. So, let's recognize that noxious chemicals, though that smoke that is in the air, and let's confront reality. Let's face the truth. If you are sincerely seeking the truth, the Qa'im has come with the truth, and he has presented you with ample evidence for you to recognize that something went wrong in the way the current Quran is compiled. The evidence is overwhelming, and if this was a legal case, it would have been game, set, and match. It's over. I think hearing Al-Sadiq talk and with the clarity with which he presents the case, that the Quran we have today is severely deficient, up to 2/3 of the original Quran missing. This is a huge problem that has to be recognized and addressed, and it is being done now through the rise of the family of Muhammad. So please pay attention, clean your hearts, and accept the blatant truth that is staring you in the face, as much as you don't like it, because the truth is a bitter remedy, but by it, the sick person is healed.
It's also very ironic that we are looking at this sect of Islam that is known as the Sunni sect, that say that the book of God is infallible, that the book is preserved, it has nothing wrong with it. And in fact, majority of the Shia are also in agreement with that statement. They say, yes, the Holy Quran is exactly as it should be, and there's nothing wrong with it. Having said that, it is more of a Shia inclination to believe that there has to be an Imam who's a living messenger from God who speaks to people.
Yes.
And it's not really something you find in the Sunni sect. But interestingly, if you ask them, and if you look at those narrations that say things are missing, and if you say to them, well, then how would we know what to do? Then they admit that, yes, the caliphs, the rightly guided caliphs, meaning the ones who were not appointed by God, but appointed by the people, such as Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman, they say that these individuals would just know what's best, because they were appointed and God was pleased with them, etc. So there is the sentiment that the caliph would know what to do, that he would be divinely inspired, that he would be enforced. But it's not really recognized that that caliph should be appointed by God and that that caliph should be appointed in the holy will of Prophet Muhammad. This is something that is very largely missed. But they do recognize that clearly the mechanism to come to the solution of problems has to come through the caliph, has to come through the man that's in charge of everything. If Umar ibn al-Khattab was stating that the Holy Quran is missing a verse about stoning, and Umar ibn al-Khattab was a very big fan of stoning, and he really enjoyed the idea that people receive that kind of capital punishment because he believed in it very strongly, then there's a problem there, because he's not using the Holy Quran, he's using intuition. He's using his own logic. He's using his own reasoning. And that means that the book is not enough. So his own words that the book is enough for us. We don't need the Prophet Muhammad's guidance. We don't need the holy will of Prophet Muhammad. We don't need the Ahlul Bayt. We don't need the 12 Imams. All of that's not true. Because clearly he did use his own mind and he did come up to his own conclusions. And when we find that there are all these verses that have been eaten by different animals or that have been lost and that are whole suras missing from the Holy Quran, it means the book is not enough for us. Even if it had been, it's not a complete book. So even if the book had been enough for us, we don't have it. We can't use it. We can't read it because it's not there. And recognizing that is extremely crucial so that we can do something about what to do with that information, so that we can know what it is that we actually believe in. We can't say both. We can't say that the book is enough, but it's not complete. And also, we're on guidance. We're on the right track. We're on the Sirat al-Mustaqim. How can you be on the Sirat al-Mustaqim when you don't have the resources to be on the right path? You can't be.
The Sirat al-Mustaqim is the man appointed by God, full stop. Anything other than that is misguidance. It will take you astray. So you have to recognize, I was also a Sunni Muslim once. But the evidence for the fact that not only was the family of the Prophet Muhammad, the Ahlul Bayt, they were appointed by God in a written will, they were also mentioned in the Quran, and this is what we're trying to get to. This is the heart of the matter and this purpose of Al-Sadiq's speech, because the Quran was systematically deleted in areas of this subject about the wilaya of the Ahlul Bayt, the problem that we have in the world with all of these different sects fighting and killing each other is happening. It had real, tangible repercussions even today, 1400 years later. People are still killing other people, and yet they hold the same book, and they are in confusion.
Yes.
Complete confusion and chaos. There is one book, but that book is missing huge portions of the original message which the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ brought. And now his successor, the second Mahdi, the riser of the family of Muhammad, is revealing the truth to those who search for it.
And if we go on to the next clip, we get more of an indication into what exactly had been lost and not preserved, but has been preserved in the chest of the man sent by God. Let's go ahead and check it out.
The Muslims nowadays, what they want to do is they want to hear these narrations. They want to put their fingers in their ears, like the people in the time of Noah, when in the Quran it says that they put their fingers in their ears and they covered their faces with their clothing in order to not hear the message. The Prophet Muhammad said, this is entirely false. You can't do that. If anybody comes to you, right, saying that the Prophet Muhammad or his Ahlul Bayt said something, you are obliged to, you are forced to accept it rather than deny it. You must accept and assume that it's true instead of denying it and assuming that it's false until the matter is clarified. So the right thing to do, the automatic reaction that the believer must have is that he accepts those words that are attributed to the Prophet or to the Messenger, lest they deny something which was really said by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that means that it was really said by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and by that action they would have belied God from above his throne and the Messenger and the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, and that is a grave sin. And so if you receive a news, if it's false or a made up one, then the sin of believing in it falls upon the shoulder of the person who lied and who made up the narration, until you find out for sure, without a shadow of a doubt, that it is something which is belied, after you take it back to Muhammad and the family of Muhammad and you ask them about it. But you never belie it, because belying the narrations is belying God Almighty. And so taking that line of thinking, of accepting and obeying that command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the tongue of the Prophet Muhammad and his messenger, accepting these narrations, that means what? That means that we have to accept all narrations unless proven otherwise, unless we have an infallible who tells us, right? So there's no such thing as now ilm al-rijal, or the study of the to scrutinize the narrators and the companions and say this was a trustworthy person or this was not a trustworthy person. We have to throw that all outside of the window. And by the way, that's exactly what the major Shia books that were written by Majlisi and other than them, some of the narrations you'll have in there that the Shia accept narrations that have a chain of narrators, and then a lot of the times you'll have a Sheikh Al-Sadiq or a Majlisi or these guys, they relay the hadith directly from Imam Al-Sadiq alayhi salam or directly from the tongue of the Imam without a chain of narrators, because the Shia accept it and they quote these narrations and they use them because they know that the chain of narration, the science of or the school of thought that is interested in studying the reliability of the men, this is a science that in it and of itself is unreliable, because there's no way to tell for sure, without a shadow of a doubt, 100% as a fact that this narration came from the Prophet or not, except if you return it to a member of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam and you ask them. So the normal thing which we must do is accept all narrations. This is what the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam commanded us to do. We have to assume its authenticity, that it's authentic, all right, before we assume that it's false, so that we don't belie God. And that means that we also have to assume that these verses that were brought to us, which were alleged to be from the Holy Quran, that we never ever deny deny any of them. Just denying one of these narrations or one of these verses from the Quran, right, without the infallible Imam telling us that these are not from the Quran, could lead us to enter into hellfire.
Yes.
That takes us now to something really, really important and interesting, which I want to share with everybody today. And that is this topic of these two suras that are not in our current Quran. So far, we've examined the narrations, and we've had in those narrations them quoting particular verses, but I want to talk with everybody today about something which 99.9% of our viewers have never, ever even heard of. And that is that there actually exists two entire suras that were written and preserved that are not placed in the current Quran, but narrations state that these surahs were from the Quran. One of them is called Surat An-Nawrain, the surah of the two lights. And another surah is called Surat Al-Wilaya. Have you ever heard of these two?
No.
Yeah. So we're going to take a moment, we're going to read Surat Al-Wilaya, and we're going to take it from there and share it with the people for the very first time. Are we ready?
Allahu Akbar, of course.
بسم الله الواحد القهار يا أيها الذين آمنوا بالنبي وبالولي الذين بعثناهما يهديانكم إلى صراط مستقيم نبي وولي بعضهما من بعض وأنا العليم الخبير إن الذين يوفون بعهد الله لهم جنات النعيم والذين إذا تليت عليهم آياتنا كانوا بآياتنا مكذبين إن لهم في جهنم مقاما عظيما إذ نودي لهم يوم القيامة أين الظالمون المكذبون للمرسلين ما خلفتهم المرسلين إلا عني وما كان الله ليظهرهم إلى أجل قريب وسبح بحمد ربك وعلي من الشاهدين. In the name of Allah, the One, the Conqueror. O you who believed, believe in the Prophet and the Guardian, whom we have sent to guide you to a straight path. A prophet and a guardian, each from the other, and I am the all-knowing, the all-aware. Indeed, those who fulfill their covenant with Allah will have gardens of bliss, and those who, when our verses are recited to them, disbelieve in our verses, indeed for them in hell is a great place. When it is proclaimed to them on the day of resurrection, where are the wrongdoers who denied the messengers? I did not appoint the messengers as successors except by my command, and Allah would not make them apparent until a near term. And glorify your Lord with praise, and Ali is among the witnesses. As far as this surah, that's the surah of the Wilaya, that is allegedly 7 verses, there are narrations that have been preserved, actually, that state that it's longer than that. And this particular surah is significant because of its contents, and you'll understand why. This surah was altered, and the names of the Ahl Bayt were taken out, which we saw in the first version of Surah Al-Wilaya that's around. We didn't find in it the names of the Ahl Bayt. It was only 7 verses. The rest of it was cut off. And then eventually the entire surah was taken out of the Quran altogether. And then he quotes the surah itself, and he says, in the name of Allah, the One, the Conqueror, O you who have believed, believe in the Prophet and the Guardian, whom we have sent to guide you to a straight path. A Prophet and a Guardian, each from the other, and I am the all-knowing, the all-aware. Indeed, those who fulfill their covenant with Allah will have gardens of bliss, and those who, when our verses are recited to them, disbelieve in our verses, indeed for them in hell is a great place. So here's a great warning, even in the surah itself, in the verse itself, that those who hear verses of the Quran and then they deny it for whatever reason, these people are going straight into hellfire.
Yes.
When it is proclaimed to them on the day of resurrection, where are the misguided ones who denied the messengers? He did not appoint the messengers as successors except with the truth, and Allah would not grant them respite until a near term. So glorify the praises of your Lord, and Ali is amongst those who watch. And Fatima is my light, and through her I seek assistance, and her offspring are my guardians. Guidance for the believers. Hassan and Hussein, and Ali the prostrators, and from his offspring the eighth of the listeners.
So obviously there's a play on words. Ali as-Sajjad is mentioned in there, wa Ali min as-Sajidin, right?
Yes.
That means that they're all prostrators, but it's a specific one because Ali, son of Al-Hussein, his nickname was as-Sajjad, or the prostrator.
I created the heavens and the earth by her clear light. So prostrate to her if you have certitude in her. I will fold the heavens by her noble name, and the earth I will make it a paradise for the patient. And those who have wronged my light,
meaning Fatima and her Ahl Bayt, her children and her husband,
those I will put into maskh, as if their bodies are like the bodies of the devils. Those are the companions of Pharaoh, Haman, and Iblis, the ones who have been granted respite. And those who responded to her sons, the guided ones, the Mahdis.
All right, so now it's referring to the 12 Mahdis that come after the 12 Imams. You have in the surah, it mentioning in there by name Ali and Fatima and Al-Hassan and Al-Hussein and Ali Zayn al-Abidin or Ali as-Sajjad, and then the eight from her sons, which are the remaining 8 Imams that lead to Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam. And then you have a reference to the Mahdis. Who are the Mahdis?
They will be carried by the winds of my chosen, and the first ones. Those are her followers, Shia, and they will be the victorious ones, the ones who support the Mahdis. On the day when her son, the one who relies on God, will rise.
So that's a reference to the Qur'an.
That is a day when the wrongdoers will not benefit. They will flee from him in fear. Indeed, the believers are the Muslims, so do not be among the heedless and repent before the descent of Ameen.
SubhanAllah. Incredible.
Huge revelation, and the people were waiting for something that the Shia do believe in, but they don't have the answer to, and they've asked their scholars multiple times saying, how do we respond to the Sunnis who say that the Ahlul Bayt or the family of Muhammad are not mentioned in the Holy Quran? Now we're finding, as was promised, that the Qaim of the family of Muhammad would do, we are finding that he is proving there are actually 2 surahs that mention Muhammad and the family of Muhammad in a very precise manner, very detailed, very beautifully, giving them their due rights of who they are that were omitted. They were not part of the Holy Quran. And he's proving it through narrations. He's actually proving that they did exist, they were mentioned, and they were not given their due rights. It was very conveniently removed. And it might kind of answer our question as to why did Abu Bakr not want the version of the Holy Quran as presented by Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib?
Yes, all the mysteries are being unveiled, and Al-Sadiq is speaking about a narration. This is a narration from Jabir al-Jufi, who was a companion of the 5th Imam Muhammad al-Baqir. You know, this is in the books of hadith of the Shia, they have these narrations with them. And the Shia are, of course, those people who acknowledge that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam appointed after him 12 Imams, and these narrations, which have existed for hundreds and hundreds of years, are now being used by the riser of the family of Muhammad to establish the fact once and for all that indeed there were large chunks of the Quran taken out for a specific purpose, for a evil purpose, and it was to usurp the rights of the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt. And he says there was a whole surah, and again, we have heard from very prominent Sunni figures who have said entire surahs were missing, and now the Ahlul Bayt are saying indeed, and one of the most significant and dangerous surahs to those who reject and oppose God was Surat Al-Wilaya. And Wilaya, Alia, is a very, very important word. And if you could just share the meaning with the audience for those who don't speak Arabic or don't have an Islamic background, I think it's really crucial.
Wilaya is essentially divine successorship. It basically means that there will always be that line of successors appointed by God with evidence that He's appointed them through the man He has sent. So every time that He will send a man, He will ensure that this individual appoints the next one in line. And we see that in the Holy Quran itself, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family is being commanded by God to reveal something to the Muslim nation. And according to history, that revelation was the successorship or the caliphate of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. So successorship is a very critical part of religion. It always has been and it always will be ever since Adam himself was created till this very day that we're in right now. And Wilaya points to that. Wilaya means divine successorship. And the fact that there was an entire surah about it, the fact that there was a whole surah, a set of verses, a set of ayat that was in the Holy Quran that preserved that concept and that was referring to Muhammad and the family of Muhammad is so incredible. What's even more incredible is the fact that Al-Sadiq, from him is peace, we see him as the Qaim of the family of Muhammad. We know him to be so because he is mentioned in the will of Prophet Muhammad, and anything that comes from him is in fact divine revelation. If Al-Sadiq had wanted, he could have said, listen, I believe that these verses that I've got on this paper are the ones missing from the Holy Quran. He could do so, and he would be very well within his rights to do so, and it would be the gospel truth. But the fact of the matter is that he's even bringing evidence that these verses exist from the narrations of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. He is taking out those very deeply buried narrations from the 12 Imams and saying to the people, listen, these existed. And the reason why this is so incredible is because I know, without a shadow of a doubt, that there are Shias out there who are listening to this, who will now be so amazed by what they have heard that exists within the books of the narration of the Shia. And they will immediately be going to their scholars and saying, why didn't you tell us about this?
Yes.
Why didn't we know about this?
Yeah, because the scholars are concealing it.
Why weren't we informed? Why did you conceal that? Exactly.
The scholars know these narrations. I have, I have heard very prominent Shia scholars speak about the fact that Imam Ali alayhi salam had the true Quran, and it was much, much bigger in terms of its volume, in terms of its information than the Quran that exists today. And now we have this narration going to a very, very close companion of the fifth Imam, Jabir al-Jufi, is confirming this. And not only is he confirming that the Quran was hugely depleted, the current one that exists, but he's also saying this particular surah, which Imam al-Baqir, from him is peace, the fifth Imam, tells Jabir, this surah, which the people say that God withheld from the people, was actually deleted by the villains in the religion of Islam.
Yes.
Why? Because they wanted to rule and usurp the rights of Al-Muhammad. And this is a fact, and this really did happen. And for those people who say, where is the mercy of God? God is intensely merciful, and He not only left hundreds upon hundreds of narrations mentioning the coming of a Mahdi, or the personality of a Mahdi, who is a messiah figure in the religion of Islam, a savior figure who comes to correct and return Islam to its pure understanding of monotheism. But God, in His mercy, also mentioned in His book the true caliphs of Allah, those appointed by Him, by name.
Yes.
By name. And they were mentioned in the Quran, but this part of the Quran was taken out, and we all know why. We all know the purpose behind deleting this absolutely critical surah called Surah Al-Wilaya. And Al-Sadiq, from him is peace, is bringing it now in all boldness, in all confidence, without anything to hide. He is saying, here you go, take this. This is from the fifth Imam that you claim belief in. And what do the scholars reply to this, Alia? They are like, well, this is a weak narration.
Oh my goodness.
This does not follow the principle of ilm al-rijal that gives us credibility to throw around big words so that we sound like we know what we're talking about, but actually we're completely bereft of knowledge. And we want to use this idea and concept to confuse people and to misguide them. And that is why we're called the non-working scholars. These are the words of the Shia clerics in the hawzas and the seminaries around the world today. They don't want you to know this. In fact, what is even more baffling is that they are afraid to talk about this for some reason.
Oh, well, it will usurp them of their own rights. Something is wrong here.
Exactly.
Politically.
So this is the point we wanted to get to. Now, for those who are of a Sunni persuasion and follow the caliphs, the so-called rightly guided caliphs, who were actually usurpers of the rights of the family of Muhammad, you can understand why and for what reason they would not want to include this crucial surah in the Quran. But why are the Shia not talking about it? This is a great question. And we have been, Alia, these clips that are coming around, they're just cliffhanger after cliffhanger after cliffhanger. There's lots of cliffhanging going on. But as we will address this question, and it really needs to be addressed very, very carefully. Because when you see what the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt said about Surah Al-Wilaya, you will see exactly why the so-called Shia want to conceal the surah as much as the Sunnis. Because it undermines their authority and their usurpation, just like the Sunnis, of the Wilaya of Al-Muhammad. This is because the 12 Shias reject the 12 Mahdis, just like the Sunnis reject the 12 Imams. But this earth-shattering surah will once and for all establish what the truth is and where the true successors and who the true successors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are.
This revelation that's come from Al-Sadiq, from him is peace, it really does expose a very terrible cancer that exists right now in the Muslim nation. And that cancer is the non-working clerics, the non-working scholars, the false custodians of religion. What they've done is, they've said that there is no need for you to worry about which narration is true or false, or which hadith is true or false, because we will tell you which one is true or false. And why is that so terrible? Well, quite simply because who gave them the right to decide which narration or which hadith is authentic or not authentic? Who gave them the authority to decide for themselves? And if you're interested in knowing more about that, you should research for yourselves what the science of man truly is. What is ilm rijal? It seems very incredibly profound on the outside, on the apparent, but actually it's really a very empty shell which has nothing within it of substance. And it's basically the idea that you should study the chain of narration, the chain of individuals who have narrated a hadith or a narration, and study how reliable they are and how trustworthy they are, and if you like them or not, and if you think that they're good enough to be telling us something from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam or from the Imams. But the Holy Quran denounces that very clearly in Surah Al-Hujurat, where it says, even if a fasiq or a disobedient person comes to you with a matter, investigate it, look into it. So clearly, following a chain of narration to see whether or not we like the people mentioning the narration is a very ridiculous idea that the Holy Quran is completely against. Where did this idea come from? Subhanallah, it came from the Sunni sect. It has nothing to do with Shia Islam and has nothing to do with the 12 Imams.
Yes.
It was never mentioned by Prophet Muhammad. It was never mentioned by the Ahlul Bayt. And yet the Shia have adopted this idea because they actually didn't have a way to authenticate narrations, because the Imam of the time was not someone that they wanted to follow. Now we're finding ourselves in this day and age with the man written in the will of Prophet Muhammad to be the individual that we must pledge our allegiance to, that is the rightfully appointed caliph of the time, and that is the Qaim of the family of Muhammad, Abdullah Hashem Al-Sadiq. And what is he doing? He's saying, let's take a look at the narrations. Let's not be afraid of our own religion. Let's open the books and read them. And we're finding that in these narrations, there are actual mentions of these surahs, of Surah Al-Wilaya and Surah Al-Nurayn. And we really want to delve really deep into these surahs. And I cannot wait for that.
Cannot wait.
We have to do this. And there will be a part 2 to this episode. We are definitely going to be delving deep into that conversation in tomorrow's episode, because it's so vital to really talk about what's been hidden so much and why has it been hidden, and how incredible is God's promise that God actually said that in the time of the Qaim, there will be the revelation of the mention of the Ahlul Bayt from the Holy Quran that was taken away, that we were deprived of, that we haven't been able to read about and learn about. Now we will be able to. Thank you to God and to Al-Sadiq for that, because it's a great blessing.
Yes, and if you think today's episode was a big deal, and it was, we can classify it. This episode has been a bit of an earthquake.
It is
and
an
earthquakes, Ali, as you know, are measured by something called the Richter scale.
Okay.
So today's episode, you could say, is a 7 on the Richter scale. What's coming up next is a 12.
Wow.
If it exists. I don't even know if they have 12 on the Richter scale, but my point is it is going to be explosive. You don't want to miss this. Exactly. The director's telling me 10 is the maximum, but this is going to be a 12. Trust me. This is unprecedented.
I totally wholeheartedly agree with you on that
Right?
one.
Thank you, Ailia. So there you go. Now, we have to really pay attention to the words of the Ahlul Bayt. They cannot be rejected on the concept of an innovation that was made by the scholars of misguidance called Ilm al-Rajal, when the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt have their closest companions, their closest disciples narrating hadith. We don't need to worry about the non-working scholars of the end times who were cursed by the mouth of Al-Muhammad. So let's focus on the Imams of Al-Muhammad and not the non-working clerics of the end times. They both have very different CVs. One of them you want to reject immediately and throw into the dustbin. You want to cling to the Imams of guidance, the Imam al-Mubin, who is the Caliph of God in every age. And Al-Sadiq, from him is peace, the riser, the Qaim of the family of Muhammad, is revealing these tremendous narrations. And wait till you see what we have in store for you tomorrow. I think,
so excited.
Yeah, exactly. I'm excited as well, because this will once and for all completely demolish every Sunni cleric's arguments and also every Shia cleric as well.
Yes.
Because this amazing surah that has been revealed by the rise of the family of Muhammad using the narrations of the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt is going to completely shift your perception to a whole new level of consciousness. So this is something you don't want to miss, and believe me, I'm still underselling this.
Yeah.
It is that big.
You know, they say, or we say actually, that one of the signs of recognizing the vicegerent of God is divine knowledge. And that means that when he speaks and the knowledge that comes from his mouth, when you hear it, you absolutely cannot deny him. It's just too overwhelmingly potent in its truth. And something within you is crying out for it. You cannot deny what you're hearing. This episode is one of those examples of the knowledge of the riser Abdullah Hashim Al-Sadiq. When you hear, that's the thing, right? When you listen to his argument for why these surahs are meant to be in the Quran, I don't think there's anyone who's a true Muslim who could reject it. No one who actually is a true Muslim, no one who actually loves Muhammad and the family of Muhammad could hear that and say, well, it's a weak narration. No, there's no argument. You listen to those verses and you know they're from the Holy Quran. You know that they were meant to be in that book, and you know they've been omitted, and for very sinister reasons.
Yes.
And we will be going into that, and we'll be going into the culprits behind it tomorrow, inshallah. So stay tuned for that. We're going to leave it on another cliffhanger. Let's do another cliffhanger, Dr. Irfan.
Yes.
Let's end it on a cliffhanger. And make sure that you tune in tomorrow on Rise Up, same time, same place. And until then, let's wrap it up.
Yes. Labbaik ya Al-Sadiq.
Labbaik ya Al-Sadiq. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.